We live in a world of bite-sized content, tweets, TikToks, YouTube shorts. This constant stream of snackable information conditions the brain to expect quick dopamine hits, making long-form reading, problem solving, or even listening to a full conversation feel like a chore. We are starting a new book club. It is Disconnected by Thomas Kersting. And what really struck me as I read through chapter 1 is what is happening to our kids in this hyper digital world. And it really made me think about how technology is reshaping not just how kids interact, but how they think, how they process emotions, and how they engage in the real world. So I want to read you a quote from page 17. He says, "Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to recognize itself by forming new neural connections, leaving behind past traits and developing new ones." A little further down, there was a doctor at Stanford University, impulse control disorders clinic, who said, "The more we become used to just sound bites and tweets, the less patient we'll become with more complex, more meaningful information. And I do think we might lose the ability to analyze things with any depth and nuance. Like any skill, if you don't use it, you lose it." This, I think, confirms something that we all suspect, that our kids, and probably, if we're honest, many adults too, are losing their ability to focus on deep, meaningful information. We live in a world of bite-sized content, tweets, TikToks, YouTube shorts. This constant stream of snackable information conditions the brain to expect quick dopamine hits, making long-form reading, problem solving, or even listening to a full conversation feel like a chore. And I saw firsthand with kids who struggled to read beyond a paragraph before checking out. They'd ask, "How long is this?" before even starting an assignment. And this isn't just kids these days complain, it's brain science. If we don't exercise the ability to engage in deep thought, we lose it. But the effects of this shift go beyond just attention spans. It's not just that kids can't sit with complex ideas, it's that they struggle to sit with any kind of discomfort at all. So that leads me to the next quote on page 22. And he said, "More kids than ever before are emotionally fragile and lack critical coping skills because they are not spending enough time engaged in the real world, person to person." So he's talking about emotional resilience, and it's built up by navigating real world interactions, getting rejected, resolving conflict, managing disappointments. But what happens when kids replace these experiences with digital ones? Instead of facing a tough conversation in person, they ghost a friend over a text. Instead of dealing with social awkwardness, they retreat to the safety of a screen. And instead of pushing through a difficult moment, they scroll to numb their discomfort. So what are the consequences? Well, we have this generation that struggles with basic emotional regulation. Kids today are experiencing more anxiety, more depression, and are less able to handle life's everyday challenges. Let's talk about and think about kids' mental health, because if a child struggles to cope with real life emotions and they seek refuge in the online world that is only amplifying their insecurities, what happens next? So I'm going to read you some statistics that he was talking about on page 27. And they'd done a survey of over 600,000 Americans. And here are some of the results. They found major depression among 20 to 21-year-olds. They found that it more than doubled from 7% to 15% from 2009 to 2017. Also, depression surged to 69% among 16 to 17-year-olds. And feelings of anxiety and hopelessness jumped 71% among 18 to 25-year-olds from 2008 to 2017. And he says, well, what changed? Could it be that smartphones started to become mainstream right around 2008? And it's impossible to ignore the connection between rising mental health issues and the rise of smartphones. So social media has introduced an entirely new set of psychological stressors: constant comparison, cyberbullying, the pressure to curate perfection. But I often think about what childhood was before this era. We still had insecurities, but they weren't amplified by filters and algorithms, feeding us endless highlight reels of what we don't have. Kids today are growing up in a world where their worth is measured in likes and their self-esteem is constantly at the mercy of the audience. Is it any wonder that anxiety and depression have skyrocketed? And do you know that the starting age is getting younger and younger for smartphones, that the average age now is 10.3 years old? What does that mean for their developing brain? And I think we need to think about the toll of this constant comparison. It actually reminds me of a story that you could share with your child, and then there's a question that you can ask to try to start a discussion. So it's called the reflection pond. So Mira lived near a pond that was so clear it showed a perfect reflections. And every morning she admired herself in the water. But one day she noticed a single leaf floating on the surface, and it ruined her perfect reflection. From then on, every little ripple bothered her. She spent all her time trying to smooth out the water, trying to make her reflection perfect again. But the more she focused on the imperfections, the less she noticed the beauty around her. The flowers, the birds, the warm sun. One morning, an elderly woman sat down beside her and said, "Why do you need the pond to be perfect? The sky is still blue, the flowers still bloom, and you are still you." And the lesson here is the more we compare ourselves, the more unhappy we become. Happiness comes from seeing the bigger picture, not chasing perfection. You can ask your child this question: can you think of a time when you were focused on small problems so much that you forgot the good things around you? Just like Mira, many kids today are constantly measuring themselves against unrealistic standards, losing sight of what makes them unique. So how young is too young for a child to be exposed to this world of constant validation and comparison? So let me take a look on page 24. I'm going to read you a quote. And he says, most kids spend nearly every waking second of every day, 7 days a week, glued to a screen, completely oblivious to life on Earth. Their brains are disconnected from the world around them, making it difficult for them to handle real-life events and adversities. And it is starting younger and younger. The average age of first smartphone issuance is now 10.3 years old. This is crazy. It's way too young. There are too many risks. Now, this doesn't surprise me, but it does alarm me. I saw it in teaching fourth grade that lots of kids had phones. I mean, I've seen 8-year-olds with fully loaded iPhones. And I've heard parents say, well, all their friends have one, so what choice do I have? And here's the thing, giving a child a smartphone at 10 isn't just giving them a way to call home. It's handing them access to the entire internet, social media, and all the psychological pitfalls that come with it. It's putting a digital middleman between them and real life experiences. I don't say this, I'm not trying to shame parents because many of them feel pressured, but maybe it's time we start pushing back against this norm. Maybe instead of asking when our child should get a smartphone, we should ask what skills should they have before they're ready for one? Because if kids are spending all their time in the digital world, what are they missing in the real world? The answer to that question is one we can't afford to ignore. So here's another story that you can share with your child to tie in how this relates to technology. The story has obviously nothing to do with technology, but they should be able to, with your help, tie this into technology. And it's called The Apprentice's Gift. A young apprentice named Taro worked in a jewel shop. He admired the master jeweler's sharp tools, longing to use them himself. One day, eager to prove himself, Taro stole a chisel to carve a gemstone when no one was watching. But without proper training, he ruined the stone and nearly injured himself. Ashamed, he returned the tool to the master, expecting to be scolded. But the jeweler simply looked at him and said, "I wasn't keeping it from you to be cruel. I was waiting for you to be ready." Tara spent years learning, refining his skills, and practicing under the master's guidance. And when the day finally came for him to use the jeweler's sharpest tools, he was prepared, not just to carve gems, but to handle the responsibility that came with them. And the lesson here, powerful tools require wisdom. Being ready isn't about age, it's about responsibility. And here's a question that you can ask your child to start a conversation. What happened when Tara rushed into something before he was ready? And just like Taro's tools, smartphones are powerful. And just like in the story, it's not about how old a child is, it's about whether they are ready for the responsibility. Rather than setting an arbitrary age, we should focus on skills. Does my child have self-control? Can they resolve conflict without hiding behind a screen? And do they truly understand the risks of online interactions? When we hand kids a smartphone too soon, we might be setting them up for mistakes they aren't ready to handle. Just like Taro, they need guidance, time, and practice before they can be trusted with a tool that can shape their world. If kids are spending so much time on screens, what important life experiences are they missing out on? So I'm going to read you a quote from page 26. Adolescents who spend more time on new media, including social media and electronic devices, such as smartphones, were more likely to report mental health issues, while adolescents who spent more time on non-screen activities, in-person social interactions, sports, exercise, homework, print media, and attending religious services were less likely. The absence of in-person connection is a huge factor in rising loneliness and depression. Physical activities, creative hobbies, and real-world socialization provide a natural dopamine boost, unlike the artificial highs of social media. Now, I think about this a lot. What happens when an entire generation grows up without real social practice? Will they know how to have hard conversations? Will they know how to handle relationships beyond text messages? Will they be able to look someone in the eye and have a conversation without checking their phone? And if they can't, what does that mean for the future? And I'm going to read you a quote from page 30. More kids than ever before are struggling to communicate, socialize, and cope effectively with real life matters because they are not living in the real world. And I don't know if we can grasp the long-term impact of this shift yet, but I do know that the solution is not banning technology. It's educating kids and parents about the side effects and unintended consequences of their tech use. It's about helping them set boundaries, encouraging face-to-face interaction, giving them opportunities to develop the social skills they will need in life. Because in the end, the goal isn't to raise kids who don't use technology. It's to raise kids who use it wisely without losing their ability to connect with the world around them. And when an entire generation grows up more comfortable with texting than talking, this reminds me of the story of the talking tree. The center of the village stood an old, wise tree known as the talking tree. Every evening, people gathered beneath it to share stories, laugh, and learn from one another. The tree had stood for generations, a place where friends became family and knowledge was passed from elders to the young. But over time, fewer and fewer people came. At first, they got too busy. But then they found new ways to talk that didn't require meeting in person. Eventually, they stopped gathering altogether. The tree, once filled with the voices of a community, grew silent. One day, a young boy wandered into the village square and sat beneath its branches. The silence felt strange, almost empty. He looked up at the towering tree and whispered, "Where are the stories?" The wind rustled the leaves, as if sighing in response. The stories were there waiting, but without people to listen. They faded into silence. And the lesson here is we lose something important when we stop talking face to face. Conversations aren't just words, they're connections. And then you can ask your child, how do face-to-face conversations make people feel different than texting or messaging? Just like the talking tree, our real-world connections fade if we don't nurture them. Kids today might be talking more than ever, but how much of it is real, meaningful communication? And if we aren't careful, we could wake up one day and realize that our own talking tree has gone silent, not because the stories are gone, but because we've stopped listening to them in real life. But here's the good news. It's not too late to change this. We can bring back the stories, the conversations, the real-life moments if we choose to. So let me wrap this up. The first chapter of Disconnected really just reinforce something that I already believed. Technology isn't the villain here, but it is something that requires conscious, intentional parenting. If we let it raise our kids without guidance, we risk losing an entire generation to digital dependency. We have more power than we think. Small, consistent changes can make a huge difference. So I'm going to leave you with this question. What's one small change that you can make today to help your kids or yourself gain control over technology instead of letting it control us? All right, until our next time, keep having those deep, meaningful conversations.